You couldn't give me a child, so I had one with someone else. This is our second chance. My wife disappeared for years, then came back holding another man's baby. She thought I would take her back, but I always heard people say things like, I never saw it coming. And the truth is, that's exactly how it happened to me. My wife and I were together for 4 years before we got married, and honestly, I thought we had something good, and I mean something really good. We had plans, a life mapped out, and for a long, long time, I really believed we were on the same page. Since we got married, we started talking seriously about having children. She always said she wanted 2 or 3. We even talked about names, about how to decorate the baby's room. She even spent hours looking at clothes and things for newborns online. She seemed excited. It was a recurring topic in our conversations, and it kept us close. Everything seemed perfect until we received bad news. After months of trying without success, we decided to get some medical tests, and that's where reality hit me. The problem was me. My count was too low, and the chances of us having children naturally were almost nil. It was like a punch to the gut. I felt completely useless. Everything we had planned collapsed in an instant. I fell into a bad place, emotionally speaking. I ended up going to therapy because I couldn't handle the idea of having failed my wife. It took me time, but eventually, I learned to deal with it. She, at first, was very understanding. She would tell me it didn't matter, that we would be happy just the two of us, but there was something in her tone, in the way she said it. I don't know how to explain it, but it seemed like she was just saying those words because it was what she had to say. She went from getting excited talking about baby names to completely avoiding any conversation about children. But it wasn't just that. Something in her attitude towards me changed. She became colder. She wasn't openly cruel, but she wasn't the same anymore. Suddenly, she started making comments about my appearance, about how I should take better care of myself, exercise, be more productive around the house. And mind you, I was never a lazy guy or anything like that, but it seemed like she was looking for excuses to criticize me. When I confronted her about her change in attitude, she simply told me I was imagining it, that I was exaggerating, that I had become too sensitive. In the end, I ended up believing her. I didn't want to seem insecure or needy, so I stopped insisting. And so a couple of years went by. Our relationship became mechanical. We were more like roommates than husband and wife. I tried to talk about other options like adoption or surrogacy, but every time I brought up the subject, she shut it down immediately. She said she didn't want to think about it, that she was happy just being with me. But in her eyes, in her tone, I never quite believed it. And then, one day, out of nowhere, she told me she wanted to go on a trip with her friends. It wasn't unusual for her to take trips with them. She had done it a couple of times before, and I always supported her. This time, she said they wanted to go to the United States for a few weeks. I didn't think much of it. I trusted her. I even helped her pack her suitcase and took her to the airport. I remember, well, the last thing she said to me before she left. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for being so understanding." At that moment, it seemed strange to me. It wasn't as if I had done anything special, but her tone was genuine, so I let it go. That night I stayed up so I could call her when she landed, just to make sure everything was okay. Her flight was supposed to last about 9 hours, so I tried to keep myself busy watching television, but I couldn't help but look at the clock every few minutes, waiting for her message. When I saw that the flight had landed, I called her immediately. The phone rang several times, but no one answered. I thought that maybe she was tired and had gone straight to the hotel to sleep. I didn't give it much importance, but when morning came and I still hadn't heard from her, I started to feel a discomfort in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I tried calling her again. Nothing. I sent her some messages, assuming that maybe she was busy or that her phone was on silent, but more hours passed, and I still had no response. That's when I really started to panic. I called her sister to see if she had heard anything from her. Nothing. Every minute that passed, my anguish grew. I even went so far as to call her friends, the ones who were supposedly with her on the trip. Maybe her phone was off, maybe something had happened and she just hadn't had time to let me know. But when I finally managed to get in touch with one of them, the answer I received left me cold. They weren't on a trip, none of them. In fact, they were in the city, just a few blocks from our house, having coffee. It was as if the floor disappeared from under my feet. She wasn't on a girl's trip, she wasn't with her friends, she hadn't gone anywhere with them. She had simply left. I just sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling my stomach sink. I couldn't understand it. Why would she lie to me like that? Why would she disappear without telling me anything? I tried to convince myself that there must be some explanation. Maybe she missed a connecting flight. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe she hadn't been able to call me. But deep down, I knew the truth. This hadn't been a mistake. This had been planned. The way she said, "Thank you for being so understanding," before she left, the coldness in her attitude over the last few years, how she had stopped talking about our future, the comments about my appearance. Finally, it all started to fit together. That night I sat there looking at the phone, waiting for a message, a call, anything. But nothing came. And deep down I knew it. I wouldn't wake up the next morning with an explanation. There wouldn't be an apology. There was no emergency. She had simply gone. I lay down looking at the ceiling, hoping it was all a dream. But when I woke up and saw her side of the bed empty, reality hit me with its full force. The first few days I was in complete denial. I kept calling her, hoping to hear her voice, to get an answer, something to help me understand what had happened. I wanted anything, whatever it was. I left voicemails without even knowing what to say, but all I got in return was silence. And somehow, that silence felt worse than anything else. It was as if I no longer existed to her, as if she had decided that I wasn't even worth an explanation. At first, her family was as surprised as I was. Her mother knew nothing of her plans and hadn't heard from her either. I ended up spending a lot of time at her house, looking for answers that no one could give me. I think they felt sorry for me. Her mother would let me stay some nights. She even cooked for me when I didn't even have the strength to do it myself. She listened to me talk about everything that didn't make sense, about how my life had fallen apart overnight. Sometimes, she would just sit there in silence. I went from one extreme to the other: anger, sadness, guilt. I asked myself over and over again what I did wrong. Did I miss a sign? Did I not give her enough attention? But deep down, what tormented me the most was a single question: where was she now? There were days when I replayed every conversation, every argument, trying to understand what led her to leave. I became obsessed with finding the answer, as if that could fix everything. I barely ate, I barely slept, and my work began to suffer. People started to notice. Co-workers, neighbors, even people I barely spoke to, everyone asked if I was okay, and I would just shrug, saying I was dealing with some personal matters. I was ashamed to admit what had happened. Saying out loud that my wife had left me without a single word made me feel even more pathetic. Eventually, I told a few close friends. They did their best to distract me. They took me out for a drink, to play games, anything to help me move on. But even when I was with them, my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about why I hadn't been enough for her to stay. One of the worst parts of all this was the people who didn't know what had happened. Neighbors, co-workers, even distant relatives who weren't aware. How's married life? Or how's your wife? Every time someone asked, I felt like a freshly formed scab was being torn off. I didn't have the courage to tell them the truth. I just smiled and said that everything was fine, but that lie got heavier every time I repeated it. Therapy ended up being the only thing that really helped me. I had never gone before, but after months of barely functioning, a friend practically dragged me there. He found a therapist, and I started going every week. Talking to someone neutral, someone who didn't know her or me, helped me release all the anger, the betrayal, the emptiness she had left me with. I spent entire sessions talking about the sleepless nights, about how I would stay awake replaying every detail over and over, looking for the missing piece. And then the therapist told me something that, although I didn't want to accept it at the time, ended up being what I most needed to hear. She made the decision to leave. That is her responsibility, not yours. It was a hard pill to swallow. For so long I thought I had done something wrong, that somehow I had pushed her away. But little by little I began to see things differently. The truth was that she had been cold and distant for a long time, and I had simply ignored it, hoping things would get better on their own. I convinced myself that if I tried hard enough, I could keep our marriage afloat, but it didn't work like that. It wasn't until I started taking small steps to rebuild my life that I realized how much I had lost myself in that relationship. I was always the one making the effort, the one making sure she was happy, that this life was comfortable. But now, with all this time on my hands, I didn't know what to do. So I decided to get back to the things I had left behind. I returned to some old hobbies. I went to the gym. I started reading the books I had been putting off. I even dared to try new recipes in the kitchen. At first, I was just going through the motions, but slowly I began to feel more like myself again. My work also improved. For months I had been running on autopilot, but now I started to really put in the effort. I didn't have much else in my life at that time, so I focused on my career and it paid off. Months later, I was offered a promotion, one I never would have gotten if I were still wallowing in self-pity. I'm not going to lie and say it was all easy. There were still days when it hurt. Sometimes I would find something that reminded me of her, a photo, an old movie ticket, little things that brought back memories. Sometimes I wondered what she was doing, if she ever thought of me, if she ever regretted what she did. But over time, those moments became less frequent. I started reconnecting with friends I had barely spoken to since I got married. We started doing things together again. We went out to play golf, to go hiking, things I hadn't done in years. It felt good to be with people who weren't tied to that disaster, who helped me move forward without dragging me back to the pain. And looking back, I realized that I had put too much of myself into that relationship. I existed only as her husband. When she left, I felt like I had lost a part of myself, as if she had left an impossible void to fill. But little by little, I recovered. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fast, but I did it. By then, I had also put a legal end to everything. After so much time without hearing from her, I initiated the divorce process for abandonment. It wasn't complicated. They tried to officially notify her, but upon receiving no response, the judge approved it without needing her consent. I signed the papers, left everything behind, and with that, any tie that bound us was broken forever. That year I was finally able to look in the mirror and see someone who wasn't defined by what she did to me. I was more than just the guy whose wife abandoned him. I had survived, I had rebuilt myself, and I had moved on. For the first time in years, I felt strong. I felt like I could really live my life without her shadow chasing me. And honestly, I was proud of that. Life was finally starting to feel normal again, or at least as normal as it could be after all that mess. I had my routine, my friends kept me busy, work was going better than ever, and I stopped thinking about her. She was no longer a ghost in every corner of my life. And then, one Saturday morning, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, I froze. It was her, standing on my doorstep, holding a baby. For a second, my brain stopped working. It was like seeing a ghost. She looked more or less the same, but a little more worn out. And the worst part was that she really seemed to think I would be happy to see her. That hit me hard. I thought I had gotten over any feelings for her, but seeing her there suddenly brought many emotions back to the surface. I thought I had buried all that, but at that moment I realized there were still traces of what she did to me. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there looking at her. She smiled as if nothing had happened, and, with all the calmness in the world, she asked me, "Can I come in?" After everything she did, she just showed up at my door as if I was supposed to welcome her with open arms. But I didn't. I stood firm and told her no, that she could stay out there and explain to me what the hell she was doing there, but that I wasn't going to let her into my house. That was my space, the place I had rebuilt, and I wasn't going to bring all her chaos back into my life. She seemed surprised by my response, as if she really thought I would let her in without question. But instead of leaving, she just stood there and started to talk. I know this might be a big surprise, but I wanted to come back and explain everything. She had that expression on her face, the one people use when they really believe they have a chance. And at that moment I had to decide. Part of me wanted to laugh in her face, another part just wanted to close the door and forget about everything. But I was also curious. I wanted to know what excuse she had, what story she had invented to justify what she did. So I let her talk. She told me she had made a mistake by leaving, that over time she realized she had lost the best thing she ever had in her life. She said she had spent a lot of time reflecting, and that, after having that baby, she finally understood what really mattered in life. And then, pointing to the baby, she said, "This is our second chance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did she think that baby was a magical reset button, and that we could just pick up where we left off? I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was furious. She kept talking, saying that we could be a family again, that she had made a terrible mistake, but that now we could start over, just the three of us. And then, I finally asked her the only question that had been eating at me since the moment she appeared. "Why did you leave?" I kept my voice steady, but inside I felt the anger burning. I had spent years trying to understand it, torturing myself with all the possibilities, and now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her mouth. She hesitated, looked at the floor, she seemed ashamed, but finally she told me. She left me because she wanted a child, and, since I couldn't give her one, she found someone else who could. She said it just like that, as if it were no big deal, as if it hadn't destroyed my life, as if I was just supposed to nod and accept it. As for the father, she implied that he abandoned her, but that she understood that the person she wanted by her side in those moments was me. Just like that. It took me a minute to process what I had just heard. She abandoned me, left with another man, had a child, and now she expected me to be okay with it, as if nothing that happened mattered. You left, you had a baby with another man, and now you think you can come back and pretend nothing happened. She started to cry, said she was sorry, that she had made a big mistake, but I didn't care anymore. Too much time had passed. I wasn't going to let her do it again. But that didn't move me at all. She kept talking, telling me that she had realized I was the only man she had ever truly loved, that we were destined to be together. Honestly, I had a hard time keeping a straight face. I couldn't believe how delusional she sounded. That wasn't love, that was desperation. I saw it in her face, in her eyes. Then, when she saw that her words weren't having the effect she expected, she tried to change her strategy. She tried to make me feel guilty, talking about how hard it had been to be a single mother, how much she had suffered. Seriously, she tried to play the victim in this whole story, as if her own decisions hadn't led her exactly to where she was now. She told me she needed my support, and that she was ready to make things work. As I listened to her, I just thought, who the hell does she think I am? I stayed silent, letting her talk, but at that point, I was done listening. So, without further ado, I told her directly, "You made your choice a long time ago. Now you have to live with it. There is no second chance here." The expression on her face changed. She seemed stunned, as if she had never considered the possibility of me saying no, as if she really believed she could just show up at my door and walk back into my life whenever she pleased. And then, just when I thought she had finally understood and would leave, her tone changed. Out of nowhere, she started yelling at me. She called me selfish, said that I had an obligation to give her a chance to fix things. And the worst part was when, with all the nerve in the world, she mentioned the divorce. "If I had wanted to, I could have taken half of everything you had," she said, "and even the house would be mine. And I didn't do it because I loved you. But we are a married couple, and you have a responsibility to me." That's when I laughed. I couldn't help it. "No, I don't." Her expression changed in an instant. "Of course you do," she insisted, as if I were saying something absurd. "We're still married. What's yours is still mine." "No, it's not," I blurted out, looking her straight in the eye, "because we're already divorced." She went blank for a moment. She didn't react. It took her mind a moment to process it, as if the idea had never crossed her mind. And then her face transformed into horror. "What did you say?" she asked. "That we are nothing anymore," I replied calmly. "You left, you disappeared, you didn't answer my calls, you gave no explanations, so I filed for divorce for abandonment. You were notified and you didn't respond. How could you do this to me?" she screamed, as if I were the monster in this story. "How could you throw away our marriage like that?" I laughed again, but this time with disbelief. "I wasn't the one who threw it away. You did when you ran off with another man and left me behind." She opened her mouth to keep yelling, but I had no interest in listening to her anymore. "Your decisions are your responsibility, not mine." And with that, I closed the door in her face. I could hear her muffled screams from the other side, but I didn't care anymore. She could pound, cry, scream all she wanted. I knew I would never let her back into my life. The woman I married, the one I once loved, no longer existed. And the one on the other side of that door was nothing more than a stranger who thought she could pick up the pieces whenever it was convenient for her. I walked away from the door and sat down. For the first time in years, I felt light. I thought that was it. I thought she would get the message and leave, but no. Instead, she started pounding on the door with more force, screaming all sorts of things. The only place I had managed to rebuild after the disaster she left me in, and now she was out there, demanding that I let her in. At first, I thought about ignoring her, letting her scream until she got tired, but then curiosity got the better of me. So I opened the door just a little, enough to show her I was listening, but without letting her in. When she saw that I didn't react as she expected, she tried to change tactics again. She launched into a monologue about how she was willing to forgive me for closing the door in her face. Yes, you heard that right. She said she was ready to start over, as if this were a simple couple's argument and not the result of years of lies and abandonment. She started talking about how we could make things work if we both put in the effort. That's when I couldn't hold it in anymore. I laughed. I really laughed at the sheer audacity of this woman. Her face turned red with fury when I did, as if I were the one who was wrong for not taking her seriously. Then I told her, "You made your choice, you had your chance, and you threw it in the trash. I'm not going to pretend that none of this happened just because it's convenient for you now." And that's when the mask completely fell off. She stopped pretending to be sorry. She started attacking me, saying that I didn't understand how difficult it had been for her, that after she left she had felt lost, that she had realized too late that she had made a mistake. But I didn't believe any of it anymore. So I told her bluntly, leaving was a choice. You planned it, you lied to me, and you did it. Now you come here and think your regret means something, but it means nothing. That made her explode. She dropped the act of the sad, repentant woman and started insulting me. She said I was unfair for not giving her another chance. Her face was a mixture of anger and something else, maybe desperation, maybe guilt. But honestly, at that moment, I didn't care anymore. She started pacing back and forth on my porch, ranting about how I would never find someone like her and how I would regret not giving her another chance. Seriously, she tried to make me feel like I was the one losing something by not taking her back. When she saw that I wasn't going to give in, she raised her voice even more. She said that I had forced her to leave, that if I had been more understanding about the issue of children, none of this would have happened. According to her logic, the fact that I couldn't give her a child meant that I had failed her as a husband, and that, somehow, that justified her leaving to have a baby with another person. Her mental gymnastics were impressive. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to try to blame me for her own decisions. So I made it clear to her, if you wanted a child so badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while you were planning your exit. She fell silent. She looked at me as if I had slapped her, but I didn't give her time to respond. That was your decision, completely yours, and now you have to live with it. She was silent for a second, but then she tried one last angle, pity. She asked me to think about the child, that it wasn't fair for me to turn my back on him. She was holding him in her arms, and she was really using him to make me feel guilty, but I didn't fall for the trap. I don't know who this child is. I have nothing to do with him. And at that moment, I saw it in her face. The understanding finally hit her. She knew I wasn't going to change my mind. She knew there was no way I would let her back into my life. I could see how the anger faded and was replaced by something else, maybe real regret, maybe just frustration, but I didn't care. To me, she was nothing more than a stranger. She stood there for a few more seconds, as if still hoping I would call her back, but I said nothing. I just stared at her until she finally understood that I was serious. And then, without another word, I closed the door. I walked away from the door feeling relieved, as if I had finally won. She spent so much time believing she could manipulate me into coming back into my life, but it was over. I was free. There was not going to be a second chance, not for her. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. And the strangest thing was that I didn't feel angry, or sad, or even surprised. It was as if all the energy I had wasted on her for years, the regret, the guilt, the obsession with finding answers, had simply disappeared. I finally had the closure I didn't know I needed. But, of course, things didn't end as cleanly as I had hoped. A few days later, I received a text message from her mother. She apologized, said she was ashamed of the way her daughter had handled everything, and that she had tried to make her see reason, but obviously it hadn't worked. Her mother was a good person. She helped me a lot when her daughter left, and I knew she was really upset about all this. I held no grudge against her, but I also didn't want to be tied back to that mess. So I just replied with a simple, "Thank you for your concern," and left it at that. I didn't give her details, I didn't try to explain my decision, and she understood enough to know that this was really over. In the following week, I didn't hear from her daughter again. At last, everything was behind me. Over time, I started to hear snippets about her through mutual friends and social media. Apparently, she had moved back in with her parents and things were not going well for her. The guy she left me for, the baby's father, was never really involved. He had completely disowned them, and now she was alone, dealing with the consequences of her decisions. By that point, she had burned too many bridges. She didn't have many people willing to lend her a hand. Her old friends, the ones who took her side when she disappeared, had already moved on with their lives. No one wanted to be dragged back into her drama. Even her parents, although they took her back, were not exactly in a position to support her and a baby. I knew this because shortly after receiving the message from her mother, I received a call from her father. He was polite, but direct. He told me that things were difficult and hinted that maybe I could help a little. "We know you cared for her once," he said. "And with the baby, things have been complicated." I listened in silence, but when he started talking about how his daughter just needed a little support to get back on her feet, I let out a small laugh. Not out loud, but he understood. I replied with all the calmness in the world, "Your daughter's decisions were her own. I am in no position, nor do I have any intention of helping." I think he got the message, because he didn't insist anymore after that. Some of her friends tried to contact me. People I hadn't heard from in years started to appear. Some, trying to play the guilt card. "She's going through a tough time," they would say. "Maybe you could find it in your heart to give her another chance." There was even a friend of hers who had the nerve to tell me that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't let my bitterness get in the way of helping. I ignored them. After years of feeling like I was never enough, I had finally chosen to prioritize myself. I gave that woman everything I had, and she threw it in the trash. The least she could do was accept the consequences of her actions instead of expecting me to rescue her. Over time, the calls and messages dwindled until they finally stopped completely. It was as if everyone finally understood that I was serious. And that's when true peace came into my life. Everything started to feel normal again. It wasn't a luxurious or exciting life, but it was mine. I had rebuilt it with my own hands, on my own terms. The freedom was refreshing. I didn't need anyone's permission to live how I wanted. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about someone else's happiness. The last I heard of her was that she was still drifting from one place to another. She jumped from one job to another, staying at friends' houses until they got tired of her. Apparently, she had started asking for help from anyone who would listen. They even hinted that she still hoped I would change my mind, that maybe one day I would agree to be the father of her child. But that would never happen. For the first time since the day she left, I truly felt at peace. It wasn't an exaggerated happiness or a great moment of revenge, just tranquility. And you know what? That's enough.